Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Gabriel Brodbar. I'm the Executive Director of the NYU Reynolds Program in Social Entrepreneurship. And I'm thrilled to be welcoming all of you to tonight's installment of the 9th Annual NYU Reynolds in Social Entrepreneurship Speaker Series. Tonight's event, The Power of the Crowd Economy, a new era of people, purpose, and platforms, with Charles Best, founder and CEO of Donors Choose, and Shannon Schuyler, who is the principal and corporate responsibility leader at PwC and president of the PwC Charitable Foundation. I'm incredibly excited for tonight's event for a whole host of reasons, but I just want to quickly share 3 of them. The first, if I can paraphrase Jon Stewart when he reviews the Book of Mormon, Donors Choose is so good. Can you hear me? Right in the middle of the punchline. Donors Choose is so good, it makes me angry. It really is one of the most powerful examples I think we can point to of what social entrepreneurship really is. At the Reynolds program, we define social entrepreneurship as pattern-breaking work of social importance done in ways that are sustainable and scalable. When Donors Choose was founded back in 2000, the words peer-to-peer lending didn't exist. Pattern-breaking, we can check on that. Since their inception, they have attracted over 1.6 million supporters. They've funded over 227,000 teachers. They've served over 14 million students. So we can check scalable, we can check social importance. And as of 2010, since many donors that participate choose to contribute 15% of their donation towards Donors Choose operations, they're self-sustaining as well. So you can put a check next to that critical box as well. The second reason I'm so excited for tonight's event is I think that the partnership between Donors Choose and PwC is really a wonderful reflection of one of the important philosophical underpinnings that have shaped the Reynolds program since its inception in 2005. And that social entrepreneurship can, must, and does cross sectors. It is not simply business skills applied to social and environmental ends, or the government trying to fix a market failure. The most sustainable, scalable solutions are going to happen when the public, private, and citizen sectors work collaboratively. And as I think we're going to see tonight, not only has the partnership yielded over $100,000 so far, impacting the lives of nearly 40,000 students, but it's a real partnership of philosophies and expertise. It's a true cross-sector partnership. The third reason I'm so excited about tonight's event is the customer experience. How many people here have tried Donors Choose? Okay, so a number of you. For those of you who haven't, I really think you should. It's an amazingly engaging experience that connects your passions to your philanthropy in a way that other donor experiences simply can't match. I'm a former teacher myself. And after I got over my disappointment at not having this resource available when I was teaching history in Houston in the early 90s, I decided to try Donors Choose. I'm also a big music fan, so I went over to the search box and I typed in Jimi Hendrix. I wanted to see if there were any teachers in the United States that shared my love of Jimi Hendrix and the educational power of a great psychedelic rock star. And so I hit enter and a whole host of possibilities come up. I first learned about Mrs. Hendrix's class at Lynn Camp Elementary School in Corbin, Kentucky. If anybody's interested, they need storage sacks and dry erase markers because they do bell-to-bell learning and they really want to keep the classrooms neat. I also learned about Miss Hendrix's book project in Crossville Elementary School at Crossville, Alabama. They need shelves, books, and library supplies. I then learned about another Mrs. Hendrix whose class at Redbud Elementary School in rural Illinois needs swivels chairs for their ADD, HD students. And eventually I came upon and learned about Mrs. Roth, Mrs. Roth has a middle school class in Marina del Rey, Los Angeles, and she needs supplies for her poetry program built around the Jimi Hendrix song, Wind Cries Mary. And so that's the program that I decided to support. It just so happens that the co-supporter is Cards Against Humanity. So I don't know what that's about. Suffice it to say, teachers like these at over half of America's public schools are participating. It is truly revolutionary philanthropy. It's using technology to provide unique opportunities for all of us to support those things that are near and dear to our hearts. So I really encourage you to check it out. I hope you've all brought an open mind and a willingness to participate in the discussion. Following the conversation, we'll have about 30 minutes for Q&A. For those of you who are joining our simulcast, a special shout out to our friends at UC Irvine, whose Net Impact chapter is joining us, as well as our colleagues and friends at NYU, Shanghai, Abu Dhabi, and London. Welcome to all of you. For people who want to tweet in questions, please use @NYU Reynolds or use hashtag NYU SOSINT. And with that in mind, please join me in warmly welcoming Charles and Shannon.
You stole a bit of the punchline, but we'll get to Cards for Humanity in a little bit. We are very happy to have you here. And one of the things that we want to talk to you about is not only what Charles has done, but really the art of the possible. I mean, I think really being able to be an entrepreneur and really seeing a need out there and figuring out what does that look like to go and to make that your purpose. And to make that your purpose and actually changing what's happening with the world. One of the things that we see is over the last several years, we've changed what our foundation is. And so several years ago, we said we're a $2 million foundation, very small charitable foundation. Most of our money actually comes from PwC, the firm. And we made a decision that we really needed to focus it towards entrepreneurs because we didn't want to solve things and give money to solve things in the same way that it had been happening. And we really wanted to look at innovators and entrepreneurs and accelerators and incubators to say who is going to be the next person to change the lives of 1 million plus teachers? Who's going to be able to be out there to change what medical treatments are there? And we knew it was the entrepreneurs that were going to do it. They were going to be the ones to really challenge the status quo and to look at the mega trends in a way that was really going to engage us and really make us feel as if we were doing something. So we made a 5-year commitment to go from a $2 million foundation to a $50 million foundation and to find these entrepreneurs and to fund them, knowing that many of them are going to fail. But that's okay, because most entrepreneurs fail fast, and then they go on to the next project, so they're not disheartened about it. Well, very early on in the process, I had the opportunity to go to the Social Innovation Summit, and it's usually run twice a year. And sometimes it's done, this year it'll be in DC on the East Coast, but it goes back and forth typically between New York and San Francisco, Silicon Valley. And Charles got up on stage and he talked about donors choose. Well, immediately I was engaged. I come from a long line of teachers, and so everyone has been very upset my entire life that I was not a teacher. But this was a teacher who was finding an additional level of experience that he could provide this greater world of teachers and students. And so the first thing I want to do is to ask Charles, who, and just by the way, Charles and I, so we've known each other for a long time, and we're very casual. So I hope you guys are casual and we'll have fun with us because we have some inside jokes that I'm sure will get shared. But how, you grew up close to here, right? So this is kind of your hood.
I did, yeah, 7 blocks away on Prince Street.
How did you get from there to a teacher to, cover a Fast Company to Stephen Colbert on your board? How does that happen?
I will tell you, first I just want to acknowledge that introduction as just about the most kind and thoughtful and eloquent introduction anyone has given. Seriously, thank you so much. And at first I was like, oh gosh, the Jimi Hendrix search, please tell me it came up with projects. And then when you said you had results, I was like, yes. And then you said all these Mrs. Hendrixes, and I was like, oh man. And then you brought it back home with a project that actually did match Jimi Hendrix. So that was just lovely. Thank you so much. And what folks should know is that in Shannon, we have someone who is not simply a corporate social responsibility philanthropic leader, but someone who's actually an executive at PwC, which is its own statement by that company that philanthropy and corporate responsibility and ethics are of kind of C-suite importance, and that's why Shannon is, not just like a head of a foundation, cloistered off on a lower floor of the building. She's a partner at the company, and so I actually have some questions about that later. But to your question about how DonorsChoose.org began, so I was a history teacher at a high school up in the Bronx for 5 years, and during my first year of teaching, my colleagues and I would spend a lot of our own money on copy paper and pencils, and we would talk in the teacher's lunchroom about books that we wanted our students to read, and a field trip we wanted to take them on, and a pair of microscopes that we needed for a science experiment. Actually, what I wanted for my students was Little House on the Prairie. Those of you who only saw the TV show might think I was dumbing things down, but if any of you have read the book for Little House on the Prairie, you will remember that it is a gripping, unsentimental account of pioneer life. And my students, even those who had never left New York City, they loved this book. But the New York City school system was not about to underwrite copies of Little House on the Prairie for each of my students, so I would get up before school and I would go to the Staples on Union Square that's open 24 hours a day. It's kind of like the go-to place if it's like 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, and you have to make some photocopies. So I would go there and I would make photocopies of that day's section of Little House on the Prairie for each of my students, which probably violated a lot of copyright laws. And what's that?
This is being taped.
Right. Yes. And as I was making those copies, I started thinking about all those resources that my colleagues wanted for their students. And it just occurred to me that there must be people out there who would want to help teachers like us if they could see exactly where their money was going. So just using pencil and paper, I drew out this website where public school teachers could create classroom project requests, and donors could choose a project that they wanted to support. Crowdfunding was years away from even being a word, but it just kind of made visceral sense that people might be unsatisfied with the typical charitable giving experience, where you're presented with maybe an image designed to make you feel guilty, and you're told to, just right now put $25 in the mail, and you're asked to just kind of trust that your $25 is being used as promised, and you don't really have a connection to that $25. You are a passive bystander. And it just felt to me that if we could use the internet and this kind of pent-up innovation and imagination that I saw in my colleagues, in my fellow teachers, we could give that $25 donor the same choice as to which project they wanted to support, the same transparency into how their dollars were being spent, the same vividness of feedback from the people they chose to help that Bill and Melinda Gates get when they make $1 million gift. So that was the concept, and I could share war stories about how we kind of got the flywheel spinning, but that was the beginning, and there's been a lot of hustle and a lot of luck, and just kind of sitting on the shoulders of these amazing teachers whose imagination we've just found a way to tap into, and these micro solutions that they come up with, which I think are often smarter and better targeted than the solutions that people would come up with from on high in the ivory tower or in central office of the Department of Education. And then we sit on the shoulders of incredibly generous donors like Mr. Zimmerman, who will be very embarrassed that I just called him out, and Ms. Carol Cohn, who may be equally embarrassed.
But there was more to it, right? So that sounds like an amazing story, right? Someone did that, you had the vision to figure out what it was. But when you get into the site, there's a lot of nuances to the experience. So not only can you drill down to exactly the topic that you want and figure it out, you can go to, I was born in Canton, Ohio, and I went to the elementary school, and yes, there was a teacher there who requested something, so I had to give them what they requested because it was my old school. But the experience is you don't have to give it all. Right? And so you're not just in this alone. It's not I'm the one who necessarily is going to get all the boxes of crayons or all of the underwater robots or all the things that they've asked. I'm in it with other people, and so I'm interested in how you thought about that, as well as one of the things I think, and you mentioned the guilt. You don't necessarily have the guilt because the person that you're giving it to actually gives something back in return. So it feels like you're also in it with them. You're in it with the teacher, you're in it with the student, and you're in it with whoever else came together to fund that particular project. So those are very specific nuances that makes this experience so different. So how did those come about, from teachers or experimentation?
Yeah. So you're right to point out that most projects are funded by groups of people who gravitate toward a project as opposed to one donor funding the entire thing. And there are very different motivations that people have. Half of the donations on our site are made to projects where the donor and the teacher live within 25 miles of each other. So there's probably some geographic loyalty going on. It's a donor saying, show me the projects in my general community that need support, because I want to help in my own backyard. Although usually they're searching for projects in their own community on the other side of the tracks. But then that means that fully half of donations are made by donors who are not just being geographically loyal. They are doing a search for Jimi Hendrix, or for Shakespeare, or for Canton, Ohio, or for yoga, or gardening, or any topic that interests them. I'll share just one anecdote when it comes to expressing a passion. There was a writer for Fortune magazine who was doing a story on Kiva and DonorsChoose.org, which Fortune thought were the two websites that might change philanthropy. And the writer, when we were done talking, said that his personal passion was saving the salmon in the Pacific Northwest, which was his kind of nice way of saying that he would not be giving on our site because education was not really his cause. But before he left the room, I did a keyword search for salmon. And there were
one way or another.
there were five projects centered on saving the salmon in the Pacific Northwest, and they were not from teachers named Mrs. Salmon or Mr. Salmon. They were actually about salmon. The second project was from a teacher at a high school in Oregon who had created a salmon hatchery in the river flowing by his school, and he needed hip waders for his students to be able to maintain and build out that salmon hatchery. Top result for keyword search salmon was a teacher on an island off Alaska, teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. She wrote in her project essay that she was 45 minutes away from the nearest store by airplane. And her students are Native Alaskans, and they had recorded their parents' folk tales about salmon, done research on salmon, wanted to share that work with the outside world, for which they needed a printer and a scanner. So going back to donors' motivations, how they pick projects, how they come together, let's say that half of donors are geographically, hometown loyalty is their motivation. Another half of donors are motivated by passion. Half of donors are brought to a project because they know the teacher and are friends with the teacher. Another half of donors are strangers to that teacher. Donors can find their Facebook friends who are also giving on DonorsChoose.org and follow their friends. So if Shannon and I want to follow each other, I can say every time Shannon, my Facebook friend, picks a project to support, notify me so that I can pile on with my friend. So those are some of the dynamics around donor giving. And to be honest, we struggle with the user experience because people are still accustomed to being hit with an image and asked to put a check in the mail and be done with it. And people have never actually answered the question, what topic am I passionate about when it comes to philanthropy or when it comes to education? Like even if you ask people, what was your favorite subject in high school? You have to kind of think for a minute to recall what your favorite subject was, let alone having that keyword like Jimi Hendrix or salmon. And so we actually, we struggle to draw out that hidden passion. We know it exists, but people don't have it in their muscle memory they don't have it at the tip of their tongue or in their fingertips, which represents its own product challenge of like, we know there's a project that will fit you and who you are, but we struggle to pull out to ascertain that hidden passion. And then, of course, there is the back and forth and the relationship that the donor develops with the classroom. As some of you might know, every donor, even
was it hard to get teachers to have their kids write the letters?
So
you get this amazing.
yeah.
We have somebody who's brought letters. So you make a donation to this classroom, right? You're trying to fund. The kids actually write you a letter individually saying thank you for providing this. Use your name. All right. Thank you, Karen. All right, so you get this letter, handwritten, from these students, right? saying, dear Ms. Cohn, I really liked how we can all see the pictures in the book my teacher reads to us. It is very kind and generous of you to give your money to help us. Even though we do not know each other, I know there are nice people in the world, and you are one of them. Thank you for helping our classroom be a better place to learn. Handwritten, every single one. Was that hard?
So at first, when DonorsChoose.org began, and it was just in the high school where I was teaching, and 11 of my colleagues created 11 projects, we didn't know whether students would write even nice thank you letters, because basically a stranger has just given them more homework, because now they have the book to take home and read, and it eliminates excuses. It probably creates often like more education that they need to undergo. And so we didn't know whether they would. It turns out students will write things that will bring a tear to your eye, make you laugh, that are raw, that give you real insight to classrooms in low-income communities, which is its own sort of teachable moment for young kids from better-off circumstances to appreciate what their school would be like if they were in a low-income community. But we did once do a survey with our teachers, and we asked our teachers if it was not burdensome that we were asking every class for every project to write these thank you letters. And we nearly had a mutiny on our hands, because teachers wrote back saying, if you eliminate this from the DonorsChoose.org process, we're going to keep doing it, even if you throw the thank you letters in the trash, because this is a singular opportunity to teach students, to teach young people the importance of gratitude, for which there are now all sorts of psychology studies showing that it makes you happier when you express thanks, when you think about what you're grateful for. It's, of course, an opportunity for teachers to do a writing exercise where students care deeply about their expression, their grammar, their spelling, far more so than if they were filling out a worksheet, because they're writing a real letter to a real person who did something real for their classroom. And one thing we're now trying to figure out is whether to continue sending physical thank you letters to all the donors who give $50 or more, but figure out whether there's a way to digitize or to digitally scan some of the thank you notes so that even donors who are giving $1 can get a student thank you experience, the same way that a $1 donor does get photographs of the project in action, a teacher thank you note, a teacher impact letter, a cost report showing how every dollar was spent. That feedback we can give to the $1 donor because it's digital. This thank you letters are physical, and so that's the one piece that we've not been able to democratize all the way down to the $1 donor.
But it's so rare, just in the giving experience, to actually get a thank you note that's personalized, right? Typically, if you make a donation, you get a form letter back that might have your name at the beginning, but it's not personal. And like you said, raw. It's somebody's real emotion, and you have that when you're working with children. Did you think going in that you would actually have a tool that companies, right, and academics would use to say, boy, when I look at a zip code, I know some of the issues that community is facing. I know some of the issues, whether it's a lack of books or from a technology perspective. You can start to get a vision of what that community's schools look like, as well as being able to look, when you look by topic, to know the things that are really trending in education. So you hear things around the Common Core and that type of thing, but this is actually a tool that, you know, if teachers need something and you start looking at that by themes, you can start to get an idea of really what's out there and what is being taught. Did you have an idea that it would be, you know, again, more than this site where these donations were going, but really used as a very important tool in the education space?
We had no idea that would happen. I think I wouldn't have even been able to define the words data science if someone had said them to me when my students were helping me get this website off the ground. But today, 250,000 teachers at 63% of all the public schools in America have created now almost 800,000 classroom project requests, about 550,000 of which have been funded. So we've now got statistical significance for, as Shannon, as you were indicating, the specific books and novels that middle school teachers in New York City think are most effective at getting kids hooked on reading, as expressed by the book projects that they're creating on our site. We can see what technology devices California high school teachers think are most needed in the classroom, which, by the way, are devices that are often very different from the shiny new toys that the superintendents think make for a good press conference. And we think that we can thereby give voice to classroom teachers who we think know their students. We think that hardworking, passionate classroom teachers know their kids better than anybody else in the system. And if we can just listen to them more closely, we will have smarter policy and more efficient budget making. Problem is that right now, what's a superintendent to do if they want to listen to teachers? They could go on a listening tour, which, like, is not really gonna enable you to take the pulse of teachers in your community. But with the data that we have now opened up, you can see classroom needs as they emerge in real time. Some of you are probably familiar with CompStat, which is the New York Police Department's program for mapping crime trends as they emerge. And before data science was a word, we did think to ourselves, what if we could create CompStat for classrooms and enable policymakers to see what teachers are trying to tell the powers that be about what resources are most needed, what topics are trending, what activities are most effective. And we see some stuff that would be of interest to policy wonks, like the fact that the recession had a very disparate and regressive impact on public school classrooms in low-income communities versus upper-income communities. So what we saw in our data was that after the recession hit, there was a 5x increase in the proportion of requests for really basic materials in low-income communities. So after the recession, teachers in low-income communities, 5x greater proportion of requests for paper, pencils, dictionaries, basic stuff, as compared to enrichment materials like a shark body for students to dissect, or therapeutic horseback riding for disabled students, or butterfly cocoons, which is actually like really exciting stuff, but maybe not an injustice that it's not available. Whereas in upper income classrooms, the recession led to no such increase in the proportion of requests for really basic materials. So there's wonky stuff like that. And by the way, the data is open, and we've done enough work to, I think it's called denormalizing, to denormalize the data, that you do not need to be a programmer to rock out on the data. So any of you, for your undergraduate work, for your master's thesis, consider rocking out on the data and taking a look at what teachers in Bed-Stuy have in common, what female versus male teachers, the language they tend to use in their project requests, what drives citizen philanthropy. Why is it that donors with the astrological sign of Capricorn, and this is true, Capricorns make both larger average donations and donate more frequently than
Who are Capricorns?
any Capricorn.
All right, we expect you on the site.
Yeah, so you can use the data to make discoveries like that, and you can even look at the data more anecdotally to see themes like math teachers who've concluded that cooking exercises are the best way to convey math concepts, because you're doing a recipe and you feel and then you eat the math concept, and you thereby remember it for a much longer time than if it had strictly been a written exercise. Or you'll even see a mini meme on our site of special education teachers who are requesting books so that their students can read to therapy dogs. And that's because these are students who are often very apprehensive and nervous about reading out loud in front of the classroom. They think they might be taunted. But their teachers have realized that if they're invited to read a book out loud to a therapy dog, they've now got a 100% attentive, non-judgmental, rapt audience, and these students can blossom. And I wager that there's no school of education that is hip to the power of special needs students reading books out loud to therapy dogs. It's the kind of thing, like math through cooking, that is kind of, it only comes from the wisdom of the front line. It's the kind of idea that only comes from people who have primary first-hand experience with the people that we're all trying to serve. So that was a long-winded way of speaking to the data we've opened up.
The other thing I've always been amazed by is how do you keep this, now that you know the word crowdfunding and you're a part of that movement, how do you keep this as something that is cool and relevant from the individual to a big corporate like PwC, to, we're going to have to get into it, Cards for Humanity. Why do we all gravitate towards this? Why has this not ended up as just a source for individuals, or it really has the broad enough reach that we're all very engaged and we're nice, you hate to use the word, but bedfellows. Like we're all comfortable being together, which is unusual because I think when you think of an entrepreneur, it segments the population more than bringing it together, but you've been able to bring them together.
Oh, well thank you for thinking that. It's not because of our name. If there's one thing I wish I could rewind, it would be to come up with a different name than Donors Choose. The syllables don't roll off the tongue easily. They don't stick to your brain for a long time. They don't evoke education. And it's kind of worrisome. You tell someone donorschoose.org and ask them to repeat it 30 minutes later, and they'll often struggle to remember it. I wish I could rewind and come up with a different name. Incidentally, minimum viable product and lean startup methodology is all the rage for a very good reason. It is true that you should go live as soon as possible with your idea in a minimum viable form. The one exception to this school of thought, I think, is actually brand name. Because your name is the one thing that you cannot launch in a minimum viable form and iterate on as you hear from customers. Like before you know it, you've got a news story referencing you with that name, and then you're like, oh, well, we can't change the name now because that initial news story will people won't know what it's referring to. Before you know it, you're locked into your name, and it's the one area where I wish we actually had taken a more old school expert consultant, make sure it's perfect before you launch approach. So it's not because of our name, and I don't think it's because of our branding and aesthetic, which I think there are other nonprofits you could point to that have sweeter or more glamorous aesthetics, although we have recruited one of the very top designers from Etsy, and I think that soon enough you actually will hopefully point to donorschoose.org as an example of a nice look and feel. I'd like to think it's the core experience that despite a name that's tough to remember, and despite an aesthetic that is not as fancy as a lot of other like hot nonprofits, the core experience is pretty awesome of being able to express a passion and forge a relationship with the classroom you chose to help. I think it's a vividness and a fun, a joy of giving that maybe is tough to find elsewhere. And then to the extent that there's any cool factor at all, I think we have Stephen Colbert to thank for that and all the stuff that he's done with our site that has helped.
Well, the one thing that I'm constantly impressed with Charles and his organization, and I don't necessarily like it all the time, is every once in a while we want something done that's just us, right? We're a company, we want our brand everywhere, we want to figure out what that looks like. And we have, before, come to Charles and said, we will pay. Like, we'll give you $1 million, we want you to build this on your site. And Charles, after he said no to me twice on the phone, we actually met in person, and I was like, but I want you to do this. And he's like, that's not what we do. He said, now, if you want to buy the cards, if you want to use the $1 million and buy the cards to be able to give them out, I will tell you that we will start to work on creating what you want to have created. And we think that is an interesting idea and something that we will put people to work on, but that's not who we are. We're not paying to do that. We'll do that as part of our normal process. How do you say no?
Well,
and we still like you.
Yeah, I love there are few corporate nonprofit relationships where not only do we get to have frank conversations, but where we can even be like totally open about it. So which is really testament to Shannon. But most nonprofits pay their rent with grants that are dedicated to paying their rent, right? Operating grants and operations fundraising, and it then means that a nonprofit is kind of willing or unwilling to do something based on whether a philanthropist has paid the operating costs. And so a nonprofit will happily go kind of a little bit off mission or a little bit out of scope if someone's making $1 million grant to their organization to cover those operating costs and more. We've taken a different path, which is we want to be totally self-sustaining on the optional 15% allocation that donors can make to our organization when they're giving to a classroom project. And it basically means that we've forced ourselves to fit all of our operating costs and operating model inside of that somewhat small margin. And it has also then liberated us from operations fundraising. It's been 6 years since I asked anybody for help with the rent payment. And there are not many nonprofits that can say that it's been 6 years since they asked anyone for help with staff salaries or rent payment. But it's come with its own discipline. And we are at times even kind of ruthless about, for example, never committing engineering resources to something unless it's going to benefit the entire ecosystem. And not even thinking of PwC, there have been foundations that are kind of befuddled when they say, but we'll cut you a $2 million check if you just build this feature that's going to be specific to our initiative. And we'll say, sorry, we can only work on stuff that's going to benefit everybody when we've heard from teachers and donors that it's going to solve a real need. And then there are those rare corporate partners like Shannon who respect us even if it's not the answer that they wanted to hear instead of just kicking us out. Yeah.
No, because I think that's something that when you think about being an entrepreneur and you think about being an innovator, people don't necessarily take that luxury, or they don't have it, because once you start to compromise that, then the door is open and everyone asks. And so that's something that I think from an organizational perspective that elevated you further in our eyes, that even though it was frustrating, we said this organization is really trying to solve the greater good versus an organizational's individual needs and interests. So what are the cool things that are coming? What are some of the interesting things that companies have come up with you to make this, even though it's benefiting the whole group, but makes things unique and things that you're looking to try?
Yeah. Well, I would say one, and I'm, you can tell Shannon and I have just like a very frank relationship, so I'm not saying this because Shannon is sitting here, but one really promising example we see is genuinely PwC, and that's because PwC is really the one and only company that has integrated the DonorsChoose.org experience into just about every layer of the company. So if you are a college senior and you stop at a PwC job fair booth on your college campus, you're given a DonorsChoose.org gift card to support a classroom project of your choice, and you're encouraged to make it a financial literacy project because that's what's especially on strategy for PwC. And then if you join PwC as an employee and you do their volunteer day, you're given a DonorsChoose.org gift card. If you're a partner at PwC, you get a special DonorsChoose.org gift card. And so kind of citizen philanthropy is woven into the PwC experience from end to end. And then PwC is using our site right now to do something that is a first. So PwC is the very first company to launch an innovation contest on our site. And this is exciting to us for the following reason. With 250,000 teachers creating 800,000 projects on our site, we've never done anything to identify the best of those 800,000 projects. And with 800,000 and knowing the kind of amazing teacher we attract to our site, like that is a crying shame, because you know that there are some diamonds amongst those 800,000 projects that ought to be put on a pedestal and replicated and adapted by teachers all across the country. And we've never done anything to do that. We got a chance to pilot this with the Paul Allen Family Foundation and environmental projects, where we were able to hold a contest. And I was just telling Shannon about one of the likely winners of that contest to identify the most innovative environmental projects created on our site. And one project that I happen to vote for, and any of you can vote, by the way, for any of the 12 finalists for most innovative environmental project in each of the
Don't be
grade
swayed by
ranges.
Charles, but this one's pretty cool.
Yes,
Yeah, it is
but
cool,
consider casting your vote for a teacher in Michigan who, 6th grade teacher, she hatches lake trout with her students because the lake nearby was terribly polluted by nearby industry a couple decades ago. This is a low-income community, and this classroom is endeavoring to restore this native lake trout to their body of water. The question is whether the lake trout that they have been hatching are actually thriving in that lake. And the teacher is setting out to answer that question with 2 underwater robots that will ascertain whether the lake trout fry, upon release, are using the reef that they've installed to help the trout actually grow from baby to adolescent. One of many examples. And you will soon be able to vote for equally awesome and like mind-blowing financial literacy projects because of PwC, which is the first company ever to underwrite an innovation contest that will call upon America's public school teachers to think deep and to think imaginatively about the most effective ways to help their students become financially literate and learn what credit card debt is and how it works and what a mortgage is and how that's calculated and what they should watch out for and how they can be responsible spenders when they graduate. I don't want to go on too long just about the PwC partnership, but there's a second angle to the partnership, which is itself a new direction for our organization. The new direction is something that is politically spicy. Internally, we call it a third way on teacher performance pay. And this began a couple years ago when we got a big grant from Google. We were lucky enough to win the Google Impact Award. Came with a $5 million grant. And we used that grant to underwrite DonorsChoose.org classroom funding credits that we gave to teachers who launched and helped their students pass math and science AP courses. The key part of this was every student in one of these participating classrooms who passed their calculus AB exam or their physics AP exam unlocked $100 of Donors Choose classroom funding credits for their teacher. So if you're one of these teachers and 20 of your students pass that math or science AP exam, you get a $2,000 Donors Choose funding credit that you can spend on your own classroom projects or your colleagues' classroom projects. Think of it as an altruistic performance bonus. And you can imagine what this is like for students who can say, you know, that microscope that just arrived in our science lab yesterday, I got that for our lab when I passed the calculus AB exam. The field trip we went on yesterday to that museum, I made it possible when I passed physics AP. The results were exciting enough that we took this same approach with girls learning the code, where any teacher could unlock $1,000 of Donors Choose classroom funding credits if and when 4 of their female students demonstrated proficiency in computer science fundamentals. And we are now about to take this very same altruistic performance reward with the financial literacy curriculum that PwC has developed. So very shortly, actually already, public school teachers are able to unlock DonorsChoose.org classroom funding credits when they have demonstrated that their students have actually gone through this financial literacy curriculum that PwC made possible. And it's an approach to incentivizing and rewarding educational outcomes that teachers and teachers' unions have actually been very enthusiastic about and have given kind of a warm and open-minded welcome. So those are a couple of the things we're working on that happen to tie into what we're doing together.
How do you come up with, I was, and I can't remember which of the social innovation summits, but you said your work with Disney. I thought that was such a great project. How did you guys come up with that?
Oh, thanks. Well, so that has its roots in the fact that we have traditionally struggled to help our teachers act like Kickstarter project creators. And what I mean is that the aspiring musicians and artists who put up projects on Kickstarter know that part of the job description of being a starving artist is that you are going to financially self-promote. You are going to maintain an email list of anybody and everybody you know, and you're going to blast that email list every time you're playing a gig. And when you put up a project on Kickstarter, you have no problem rallying your network and asking people to fund your project. Teachers on DonorsChoose.org are different. They are, by and large, a little apprehensive about asking for money. They've never fundraised before. And in fact, for our first 10 years, we thought of it as our responsibility to get projects funded. We figured most of the teachers who use our site are in high poverty communities. They could never hit up their students' parents for donations. Let's not even ask them to generate any donations for their projects. That's on us. We started seeing a few years ago that if given some tools, some teachers are happy to share their projects. We then saw that if we give teachers a philanthropic promo code, they have an excuse that it turns out they always needed to get over their apprehension about fundraising and tell their aunts, their uncles, their ex-boyfriends and ex-girlfriends, their former college classmates about their projects on our site. And so this philanthropic promo code is exactly that. It is a magic word that you can use that a teacher can share with friends and family, which if entered during the checkout flow will double your donation. Disney realized that this is a kind of a unique branding opportunity, because what if the magic word is Disney? And what if the most passionate, imaginative, respected and admired teachers all across America are telling all their friends and family, shouting on Facebook, shouting from the rooftops, hey, there's this magic word. The magic word is Disney. Enter that word when you're giving to my project, and your $20 will become $40 right before your eyes. And if you geek out on ad tech and the advertising world, people have become very good at tuning out advertisements. I don't think people are tuning out Disney when they're typing in the characters D-I-S-N-E-Y and seeing something that is kind of magical happen right before their eyes. So that is both, I think, an example of how we like to help companies do well by doing good, but it's fueling our growth as an organization. It's not like becoming NASCAR and slapping logos. It's this utterly vital thing, which has actually given us a second wind of growth, which is that now many of our teachers are starting to act like Kickstarter creators.
That's so exciting to be able to do that just through coming up with that idea and making a connection, having a company see that as a potential for them to do it. Okay, so besides the name, Donors Choose, did I cue to change that? Is there any other things that you've done where you felt, you know, we kind of failed at this, but we're able to learn from it relatively quickly?
The name is uppermost of mind of stuff. I really wish we could rewind. We were later than we should have been in digitizing photographs. So until only like 5 years ago, it's embarrassing how recently, we would mail a physical disposable camera to every teacher for every project to take photographs, old school style, and then put that camera back in the envelope and mail it back to us, where we would physically develop the photographs and send them on to the donors. And it's embarrassing that it was as recently as 5 years ago that we were doing that. We should have been a little quicker to digitize photographs.
What was the thought about having the purchase of whatever goes to the classroom done by you all versus done by the teacher?
Yeah. So unlike most crowdfunding platforms, when a project is funded, we do not give cash to the teacher. We purchase the resources and have them delivered to the classroom. So I gave the example of therapeutic horseback riding for disabled students.
Right.
In that case, we would pay the horseback riding stable to provide that service. If it was a shark body for students to dissect, we would procure the shark body and have it delivered to the classroom. Ditto with field trips. And we lost potential supporters in our first few years back in 2000 because they saw this approach and they said, that is so labor intensive and totally unscalable. You'll never be able to like ramp up to more than a few hundred projects and still do this purchasing and fulfillment of each project. And at the time, actually, eBay was ascendant and Amazon was considered old school and ill-fated because of their hands-on procurement model. And so with eBay ascendant, people were like, you should have an eBay model. You should not be getting in between and guaranteeing integrity in this labor-intensive way. And there, we've taken a high-tech approach to becoming scalable. With some other pieces of our workflow, we've used crowdsourcing.
Right.
With other pieces, we've used digitization. In the case of project fulfillment, it's been kind of classic high-tech, where we developed an electronic procurement system so that the teacher, when they're putting together their project, they can go shopping in Best Buy, in Carolina Biological Supply, in Amazon. They pick the paintbrush, the microscope. They put together a multi-vendor shopping cart, which they transmit into their Donors Choose project instead of paying with their own credit card. And then when the project is funded, our system takes that multi-vendor shopping cart, turns it into purchase orders that are electronically sent to the respective vendors saying, here's what needs to be purchased, here's where it should go. We get invoiced electronically, we pay electronically. If an item is out of stock, we're told about that electronically. And so we kind of powered through it and automated everything we could in kind of a lots of software, high-tech approach.
You've come so far in a relatively short period of time. When you look out for the next 10 years, 15 years, what do you think it's going to be like?
I will answer that, and then I have questions for you. There's a knock on DonorsChoose.org, which is that we are a Band-Aid solution, that we are a place where people can perform Good Samaritan deeds and forge one-to-one connections, and there are lots of heartwarming human interest stories that happen through our site, but there's nothing that's going to change the system itself. Where the knock on us would be that we treat symptoms, we don't address causes. And there are funders' doors that are closed to us to this day because of that first impression of our site. And so we have two goals. One is to inspire 1 million people to give $100 million to classroom projects at 100% of our country's high poverty public schools, all in one school year. So that's our numerical goal. Then we have another goal, which is to respond to that skepticism, respond to that Band-Aid accusation by showing that crowdfunding generally and DonorsChoose.org specifically can actually help to change the system itself. And there are 3 ways we think we can do that, which very briefly are: 1, opening up our data so as to make billions of dollars of government education spending smarter, better targeted, more efficient, because now policymakers and budget makers can see in real time what teachers most need and what teachers are trying to tell them about what priorities ought to be. Second way we think we could change the system itself is by enabling inventors and entrepreneurs to circumvent the educational industrial complex, which right now requires a sales force and a group of lobbyists and the permission of the Texas and California state commissions on textbook approval if you want to get a new invention, a new service or a product introduced or adopted. We think that DonorsChoose.org can be a platform for those inventors to circumvent that and directly reach teachers and students. And then finally, we think we can hack the performance pay debate as we discussed and find common ground between the reformers and the teachers union camp over this issue of how can we financially reward teachers who do great things with their students. Can I ask you a couple questions?
Sure. Then we have to cut to questions.
Okay, awesome. So first of all, if there are some folks in the room who are in the Reynolds program, are thinking about social entrepreneurship, are thinking about CSR, and they one day want to, they want to be you. They want to be a leader of a company's philanthropic, cause marketing, corporate responsibility efforts. What courses should they take? What work experiences should they have to be a corporate responsibility leader?
I think, let me tell you what I think now, and I think that'll evolve. I think now when you look around, the people who are doing this type of role for companies, they ended up there because they were at their organization a long time, right? I've been with the firm for 17 years, and I think part of the issue is we have 210,000 people globally. The hardest thing about PwC is understanding how things work. And so you need to figure out where to go to get things done and who are the people who are on your side and how do you actually find your way through the organization. So everybody that's on my team, we have about 120 people globally, about 20 within the US, they came from very unique backgrounds. I have some ex-accountants that are there. I have people from marketing that are there. I have people from the human resources world that are there. I mean, you name it, and that's what's on the team because they bring an expertise and their network to the table. And so when I get resumes now and people, whether it's undergrads or masters, and there's not a whole lot of work experience, there's internships or different volunteering or different missions that are done, and they're like, we want to do that. I'm like, well, what is the skill that you can bring? Because what I want is, your PR background, and how can I turn this PR person into a CR person? Right? How can I turn this HR person into realizing how to drive my employee engagement strategy around sustainability? That's what I'm looking for. I do think as we continue to evolve over the next 10 or 15 years, especially in the areas of environmental sustainability, I think it will continue to be more focused on different things in the engineering space, especially for companies and utilities that have more of that directed difference. I also think that there's a lot around measurement. I mean, right, holy grail is to figure out what is the total impact measurement of the things that you do and how do you really put a return on investment on that. And so I think a lot of schools are doing a really nice job of trying to figure out that equation. And I think people who are taking those courses, who are thinking about what does that look like and how do you really tangibly measure social value and social good, I think that will continue to be a trend and people will pay for that.
I want to ask about whether you and a couple other corporate responsibility leaders I can think of represent a trend. So I mentioned that Shannon is a peer to the leading executives at PwC. At PwC, corporate responsibility isn't this like, oh, that's cute, let's do that for some photo ops department. Shannon is a partner. At Goldman Sachs, Dina Powell is a partner, is a peer to all the C-level executives at that company. And I think at MTV, so Stephen Friedman, who is the CEO of MTV, he was not previously their CFO. He was not previously their COO or their head of marketing and sales. Stephen Friedman took the CEO chair after being their corporate responsibility CSR philanthropy person. And I think it's maybe not coincidental that through I think it's 16 and Pregnant and Teen Mom, MTV has actually changed the teen pregnancy rate in the United States through those two shows. It's tough to say this, more than any nonprofit. And it's probably not coincidental that MTV, which has had this incredible societal impact in that specific way, it's not coincidental that they've had that impact, and the fact that their CEO was previously their corporate responsibility leader. Is this a trend? Are there more like you, like Dina Powell at Goldman Sachs, like Stephen Friedman at MTV, who are considered peers to the leaders of the company? Or are there more companies where it's still kind of, that's cute and we'll roll that out for a photo op?
I think more companies are trending towards these really being strategic roles. I think you still have the ones that the photo op is nice, and part of it I always ask when I meet different folks is, where do you sit? Do you sit in your marketing and sales group? Does your group sit within human capital? It can tell you a little bit about how that is viewed or what their focus is, not good or bad one way or another. I fought really hard to be in strategy. I was like, I don't want to be in those other groups. I want to be in strategy because that's the first to know the things that are happening. That's the first to know what's going on in India, or what are the mandates that are happening from a sustainability standpoint in the UK, or the new mandate that's come out in Germany around women on board seats. You kind of know all this that happens. And the one thing that I'm amazed about, and Charles knows very well, one of our vice chairs, who's one of my mentors and sits on Charles's board, is I have the ability to see all different parts of the organization. And so CR is one of the few things in the organization that goes cross-line of service, cross-line of business. And so whether it's pro bono work, environmental work, whether it's charitable foundations, whether it's ethics, whether it's diversity, whether it's an engagement, that all comes through me. Right? So I know what happens, and a lot of times when you're in a big corporation, you have people who've come up in the audit practice, or people who've come up in the tax practice, or people in different functional areas, and they haven't necessarily seen all those different facets and the issues that happen when you pull one lever, and what are some of the consequences. And so I think that there's a lot more organizations that are realizing the value, and the value that if you're going to make this just a nice photo op, it's going to go bad for you. I mean, I think we all can point to companies that had a really nice campaign, and then it gets really ugly if something goes wrong, because people can see through it. And people call it greenwashing, even though it doesn't have anything to do with the environment, but people can smell a fake. And once you get caught once, you can't really go back. And so I think people are seeing the value of it, and ones that aren't doing it are getting called out. I mean, it's still there, but I think it's trending the right way.
What's the single most fun part of your job? The appointment on your calendar that you're most looking forward to?
Oh, you know what? I love the fact that every single day my job is different. I mean, I was going through, and over the last 10 years, 8 years within this role, I've been on the Ellen Show. I've spoken in front of the U.S. General Assembly on disaster preparedness. I have a radio show once a month on Sirius Radio. I work for an accounting firm, right? I work for a large professional services firm. You wouldn't think that you would have all those things, and every day it's different. And the coolest part is to be able to sit next to a Charles and to hear, I mean, it's so inspiring. And it makes me say, how do you reinvent this organization? I feel very proud to be a partner at PwC. We've been around for 110 years. How do I reinvent that? By looking at what somebody did as he lived out his purpose of being a teacher and take it to the next level. How do I do that? And I think people don't have that opportunity, so I definitely think that's a pleasure.
That's awesome.
So with that, we wanted to turn it to you all. If you have any questions for Charles, pick his brain on things that he's doing.
Just so we can get to as many questions as possible, please get right to your question.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm actually curious as to how this relationship, Shannon, that you have with DonorsChoose.org better positions PwC in the marketplace beyond the image of corporate social responsibility.
That's a great question. I want to hear the answer.
Well, for us, education, obviously, a lot of organizations, especially when you hire as many people as we do, we hire about 20,000 new hires every year in the U.S., and so multiply that then over the globe, and it's tens of thousands more. For us, education is key. The issue is there's a lot of nonprofits that focus on education, and so you want to start honing in on some that have the greatest impact. And when you look at the U.S., as Charles was saying, the scope and the scale was something that we knew could continue to grow, and that he wanted to challenge himself to continue to grow. There's a lot of nonprofits that you work with that they have their foothold, and this is kind of where they serve, and they do it very well, but they're really not willing to reimagine. But because of the model continues to grow, and because there's an emotional connection, it's easy for us to get that connection to it. And I think the credibility certainly that Charles has brought, being a famous entrepreneur and being a game changer in education, is one that we're proud to be associated with. And I think that elevates our brand, so it's not just another education, but it's one that's cutting edge, and it's one that it challenges companies, as I was saying before, just as much as we challenge him. And people have that credibility of Donors Choose, and so I think it helps to elevate who we are by having that type of affiliation.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Best. I'm a former high school English teacher. And Donors Choose was absolutely incredible. It was transformational.
Do you use the site?
Not so many times. I got more books to teach than I could imagine.
That's awesome.
I almost didn't retire because.
What project do you remember most fondly?
I asked for This Boy's Life, a book. The kids loved it. I had students who were interested in Native Americans. All of a sudden, I got Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. Students were interested in psychology, and I got A Clockwork Orange for them. All these books, it was incredible. Other colleagues were getting laptop computers and LCD projectors. Donors Choose was changing the landscape. But I thought there was a dark side. And I wanted to know, when we would go to administrators and ask them for resources, they were saying, go to Donors Choose. And I kept saying, is this like a windfall for administrators who do not have, anytime I would go to them, it was like, go to Donors Choose. Everybody's getting material. You don't have to go to us anymore. Did they have more resources? And I had the feeling they were spending it on themselves. And I was wondering if you were aware, is this a problem or something in the landscape where, hey, we don't have, they have a budget, they control the money, and if they don't have to spend it on us, they could spend it on paper clips.
Yep. I love your question for how sobering and hard-hitting it is. Thank you for that. So I think that in some rare instances, there are charter schools that, by virtue of being charter schools, have the budgeting flexibility and almost the agility to respond and to move line items based on whether projects on DonorsChoose.org get funded, and your scenario may actually hold. There's one, and it's actually, the charter school I have in mind is an incredibly well-respected, amazing charter school that is worthy of funding from as many sources as possible, but they do have that agility. My sense, and you should feel free to jump in again, is that traditional public schools, non-charter public schools, do not have a whole lot of budgeting agility. There's very little that's truly discretionary. Most budgeting is like, this amount must go to this. We've all heard the stories of like burning more fuel than you need because you're only allowed to spend that money on fuel, and if you don't use it on fuel, you lose it. And that's actually kind of characteristic, I think, of a lot of budgeting. There's a very small sliver that's actually discretionary. And I don't think that a school principal, so first of all, I think that most traditional public schools aren't even capable of responding in real time. Ooh, that project was funded. Let's move dollars out of the books line item and into the desks line item because that book project got funded. They're just not even able to do that. And I do think that it would also be impossible for a principal to actually enrich themselves or do something untoward. I think the worst case scenario is that the funding of a book project unlocks more dollars by the school for the school's budget for desks. And I even think that that worst case scenario is rare except in charter schools that actually have budgeting flexibility and that can respond as stuff is happening. But to affirm some dark side, I'll tell you one other dark side in Shannon's hometown of Chicago. There was a teacher who notified us years ago that her principal was telling her she would be fired if she put up another project on DonorsChoose.org, and that was because her first project had requested dictionaries, and it was very respectful of the school. But by virtue of requesting dictionaries, she was revealing that the school didn't have dictionaries, and the school principal did not want that need exposed to the broader world. And that was actually the first time we got excited about the potential of our data to kind of change the system, because we were like, oh wow, teachers are using our site to go public with classroom needs and deficiencies that might otherwise be disguised.
Charles, thank you for being here. I'm just totally blown away by your business model and what you've done with Donors Choose. I have a question. You seem to have cracked the code on the retail philanthropic market. I mean, the eBay marketplace of retail philanthropy. To the extent that you're, turning away major gifts, and to the extent you might be turning away bequests. I work with a charity that raises money through multiple modalities, and there's several of our donors that only give $75, maybe 5 times in a row, and they pass away, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, they have $1.5 million gift, right, a bequest. Are you passing up those kinds of opportunities, and is that a challenge you still need to crack?
Thanks for asking. I think we are at the kindergarten level of Fostering, I think they call it planned giving, right? Bequests, encouraging people to put us in their wills. We are doing a poor job of that, I'm certain. And we probably should be more thoughtful about it. I'll tell one anecdote, which is that I'll tell you one anecdote, which is that 3 years ago I got this voicemail from an elderly woman in California, and I sounded like she was just having a tough time navigating our website, and I called her back just out of courtesy, and she asked how many projects there were on the site from California, and I looked, and there were 2,100 projects from California. And then she asked, well, how much would it cost to fund them all? And I looked, and it cost $1.1 million to fund them all. And then she hung up and figured I'd never hear from her again, but 3 days later we got a $1.1 million check in the mail. So that on the first day back to school, for all California public schools, in one crazy surprise moment, we could fully fund every single teacher's classroom dream. Realized every classroom dream with one snap of a finger and just like shock people in the most joyful way. And I will say that it was her last philanthropic act, and she passed 2 months later.
Great, thank you.
Question about, you were saying that you wish there were a way to better tap into donors' passions. And it seems to me from the way Donors Choose is set up that you're doing a pretty good job of tapping in, because people say, oh, I see that project I like. What would you like to know about, or how would you better like to tap into donors' passions than you're already doing? What would that look like for you, and what would that give you the ability to do?
I think we actually would just welcome other people's suggestions for how do we surface that hidden passion. It's not at the tip of your tongue to say Canton, Ohio, or Shakespeare, or Salmon, or Jimi Hendrix. How do we pull that out of someone who may be on our front page for all of 5 seconds? And to be honest, that sort of opening question, I would just love your suggestions for what we ought to A/B test on our front page, over the search box.
Do a quiz.
What's that? Do a quiz?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very smart, 2 question, 3 question
Yeah.
quiz.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested, you spoke about this idea of Kickstarter, right? The teachers are Kickstarted, or maybe the teachers are change makers, Ashok is now talking about. So I was wondering if you've seen any interesting initiatives around teacher preparation, And maybe whether Donors Choose is looking at other countries in the world, like India or Brazil, or countries
Yes.
where they are facing even more challenging situations for education.
I'll try to give a real short answer. So we are running a pilot right now, thanks to the Gates Foundation, where we have opened to professional development projects. So teachers, for the first time ever, can seek resources that will make them better teachers. To your point about other countries that could serve as a model, we spend most of our time trying to get smart on user experience and logistics and fulfillment, and I at least am not nearly as knowledgeable as I should be about whether Finland is or is not worthy of emulation and how Shanghai and Singapore schools teach. I bet there are folks in the room much smarter than I am on that topic. We do plan to stick to our knitting and help people in other sectors in other countries launch micro-giving or crowdfunding sites. But we plan to stick to our knitting and remain committed to public schools in the United States until we really feel like we've made actual headway in kids from every community in our country having the materials and experiences they need to learn.
Maybe over here, we're having some mic problems, so if you can just say your question really loudly and maybe even repeat the question.
Sure, you got it.
Thank you.
You're in good luck because I have actually a voice that projects. First, I just really want to acknowledge the two of you for the relationship that you've created. I am a graduate student. I'm finishing up my master's in fundraising and grant making from the Reynolds Center for Philanthropy. And one of the things that I've learned is the difficulty to actually get to have that kind of relationship, with a corporate sponsor and a nonprofit entity. So I know that it takes something out of both of you to generate that kind of relationship. And I really think you should do a talk about, how you generated that relationship so that other people can generate the same relationship, because there's a huge need for that. My other thing is that I really want to acknowledge you for, I really heard loudly your commitment to your vision. When you started talking about, they're looking at us as a Band-Aid, when they have like this other vision of how things should be to change the system. Well, you know what? They've been trying to change the system for hundreds of years now, and they still can't do it. We still have poverty. We're still having problems with education. And
He's going to have to repeat all this.
I love it.
Get to the question.
so, why I'm bringing all this up is that, like you, I actually started this program as I was starting chemotherapy to survive a second diagnosis of breast cancer. One of the things that I found is that we have all of these hundreds of millions of dollars and all of this vision to end cancer, but while people are going through treatment, there's really nothing outside of conventional medicine to help us relieve pain from all the physical, emotional, mental, all of the things that we're going through. So that brings me to my dream, my vision is something that I want to generate and create so that I can get the conventional medicine, alternative medicine, and to get all of these people to start communicating with each other, because there is acupuncture, there is Reiki, but then we have to pay for it. And I had a job, I have an education, I had the insurance. I can only imagine what it's like for people who don't. It's like, how do I bring that to them? So, and then there's this, this world that I want to penetrate, and I really have no clue how. I don't know how to actually reach a foundation like PwC, or someone who's doing that. And from someone who doesn't, who has no relationship built. That's where, once I get in, I'm okay.
The question is really.
I think I can take a stab at recapping. It sounds like question one is how have we developed this relationship of trust and candor that you don't normally see, and I'll ask Shannon to speak to that because it's really thanks to Shannon that we have that relationship. And then the second question and third, I feel like are about that. Thank you for asking about the Band-Aid solution, and then about how crowdfunding might play a role in either medical research or in medical interventions. That's how I'll interpret your third question, if that's okay. And I'll just quickly on the second front say that I appreciate your saying that the Band-Aid accusation falls flat on the years and years where a lot of things haven't changed. And I think
So that you're like, forward on that.
oh, well, thank you. To me, I think actually the simplest thing that I should have said is that I don't think anybody really believes that kids should go without books to prove a point about the insufficiency of government funding. On the very faulty notion that if only those kids in low-income communities could go another few years without any books, then that will by definition change the system. Like surely that's not the case, and that's why we get a little riled up sometimes about the Band-Aid accusation. Anyway, how do you forge relationships with nonprofits that are full of trust and candor, which kind of is rare?
Well, I think first of all, corporates typically are not very good with our relationships with nonprofits because some of us go in and say, this is how we do things, this is how we do things every day, and we want the timing, we want it done in the legal speak that we have it in, and it gets very frustrating, right? If a timing, if a deadline is missed, if it's not as strategic, if it's not as business focused, we shut down, we get angry, we stop taking calls, and then it ends up being a relationship where a check goes back and forth, but not really something that grows and develops. And I think the thing with Charles and his team is it's run like, and I hope you got an idea, this is a business, right? I mean, it is a socially focused business, but he runs it in a very strategic way. We get that, right? I can have that relationship. The respect I have for him of saying, Shannon, that's just not where we're going to go. I appreciate you wanting to do that, but that's not where we're going to go. Let's go here was huge to be able to say that's how we work with our clients. And so to have a nonprofit doing that in the same way, that makes us equals in that. And so I think there's very few times that actually happens. There's many more nonprofits that we work with where they'll do anything that we say, whether or not it's good or bad, as long as we pay for it, or won't do anything at all. If we say, hey, we have to have a pro bono project or we have to have volunteers, they'll be like, no, we just want your money, we don't want the other. Well, that's a problem. And Charles has really forged these relationships because of, certainly his incredibly engaging personality, but he knows how we look at this. And so he makes it, and his team, people who work with him, make it that way as well. And the one thing that I would say about how do you go about kind of getting into this, if into this is from a corporate standpoint, first find out and make sure you're not wasting your time. Go to the people who have the passion and who have the interest that you're in, right? We were talking this morning or a little bit ago, if you have a specific area, a specific disease, right? And congratulations on your battle with cancer, by the way. But if that's what you want to go into, look for those companies that you can use that as a lever. All the people that I've hired internally and externally are people who came to me. First of all, they did not say they ever volunteered before, because I got to tell you, if somebody comes and says, hey, I'm a great volunteer, I've been in Africa for the past 4 months, I'd never look at the resume, right? Because I can send somebody there. I don't need this person to have gone there. I need to have why, because of your background and because of what you've done, what can you see in us that we are doing wrong? I don't want you to tell me that PwC is great. I want you to actually say, this is what you're missing, and I can fill that because this is my expertise, and those are the people who've ended up on my team.
Something down here in the front row there? Yeah. Sorry.
I feel like since the recession, foundation money has dried. What do you see as a trend in terms of crowdfunding, in terms of solving the world's problems for nonprofits or for social entrepreneurs? Is crowdfunding just something of a phase, or is it kind of the wave of the future in terms of funding the market gaps or the needs in the community?
Let's see.
Did you see a downturn? So during the recession.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, great. Thank you for that prompt, because I have something halfway original to share on that front. At first, I was struggling because I don't actually have the aggregate statistics on whether crowdfunding is growing and whether it's growing at a rate sufficient to make up for any decline in foundation giving, which Shannon would be more expert in as to whether that's happening. One thing I will say is that When the recession hit, we saw something really interesting. We saw a huge increase in the number of people giving and a huge decrease in average donation size. And maybe the precipitous fall in average donation size is to be expected. People feel like they can afford less. They're concerned with kind of conserving their resources. But what was fascinating to us was to see, we posted a 90% year-over-year increase in the number of people giving to DonorsChoose.org in the year following the recession. And I think there actually are a lot of studies that show that the more someone feels close to people who are struggling, and the more someone who is struggling, the likelier they are to be giving. African American homeowners are the single most philanthropic demographic in America, period. And there are all sorts of interesting statistics about lower income people giving more of a greater share of their income than do upper income people. And whether crowdfunding can step in, I think that in a decade, a real percentage of our country's GDP will be crowd-funded projects and ventures that may have come through for-profit crowdfunding sites. So I do think that it will have a real impact on the economy, and maybe Shannon could speak to whether speak to the interplay between crowdfunding and foundation giving and corporate foundation giving.
I think what we've seen, and again, it's based upon where in an organization and what they're trying to get out of their foundation efforts or their CR efforts, we've gone up dramatically. And so year over year, even through the recession and now, we go up dramatically because one of the things is we sit down at the table with the business and say, this is good for the business. We now have 88% of our people, 88% are involved in some aspect of corporate responsibility. So that's a part of keeping them there. That's a part of having the same people serving clients so our clients have a better experiences. Our people actually feel like they have a purpose. And so it's filling in a lot of those gaps. So we're actually seeing more money go in, which is actually more money that we can turn and put out, and trying to figure out how can we find the next Charles Best, right? Our issue is how do we continue to find organizations like this one so that we can really get at what some of the issues are and to address them. So I think we're seeing overall of movement in many companies, not all of them, but even we were talking about earlier in India, right? They just came out with a Companies Act actually 2 years ago, and it goes into effect at the end of this month, that specifically, based upon a certain amount of revenue, companies are mandated to give 2% of their profits to charities, mandated. The average that a company gives in the US is right around 1%, a little over 1%. And so as soon as that came out, not only are we worried about and figuring out what we want to do with our practices and our clients in India, but we said, what if that happened in the US? So we've been modeling ever since that act came out saying, let's get to 2% before we have to get to 2%. And I think you see companies trying to be proactive of what would this look like if this is something that we needed to do, because maybe that's the wave of where we're going. I think that's exciting.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
If you've already covered this, I want to apologize, but if you haven't, did you think before you started about not having a nonprofit structure when you started the company? And the reason why I'm asking that is because I'm actually a founder of a nonprofit that's about 24 years old, $3 million budget, big youth agency in New York City. But I haven't run it for the last 10 years, and I have an educational software company that works with school systems, 25 of the largest school systems in the country. So I have experience both with the nonprofit side and the for-profit side. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't miss the nonprofit side at all. So I just, people talk about the structure and everything like that, but to me it's incredible that legally we haven't readdressed that. We keep talking about schools, we talk about all these other institutions, and we haven't, in my opinion, had a really intelligent discussion about what a 501c3 structure really is and all the innovations, because I know from developing technology in both of these companies, it's very expensive. And I find it to be a lot harder in the for-profit world because it's oftentimes satisfying somebody who's not a direct constituent, whereas the minute you go to the for-profit world, you're actually working directly with the people who are getting the services. What a concept. So I just wanted to ask if you thought about that, and how's it been?
Well, we enjoy some of the kind of benefits of that you'd associate with a for-profit company. For example, we get to isolate our success, our performance, to a couple really simple statistics, as simple as profitability and revenue growth for a for-profit company. In our case, that is year-over-year increase in the number of classroom projects being funded in high-poverty public schools. And that's a number that you can track every morning, and that is as clean and clarifying as a profitability metric is, or stock price is for a for-profit company. DonorsChoose.org began before there was a trend of mission-driven for-profit companies, so I probably wasn't, I don't think I was even smart enough to think of that as a possibility, but I'm not wistful about that, because I actually think that somewhere between a third to a half of our giving to classroom projects would dry up if we were not a charity. And maybe the way to conclude is just by asking, like, Shannon, you probably would not be supporting us in the way that you do if we were a for-profit, right?
Probably not. No, I mean, we certainly do make education commitments for profits, but it's not the emotional connection, and you mentioned that, is not necessarily the same. And so you're not necessarily with a for-profit, the ones that we deal with, getting to the user who actually needs it. We're here, we feel like we're actually getting to the user, so it makes the experience very different for a company as well as an individual.
But I think also people from the outside world, for lack of a better term, especially if you're in the nonprofit world, is a tendency of thinking somehow or another people who are running nonprofits are not running businesses, which is so absurd.
Which I think that is exactly right, but that's why organizations like DonorsChoose.org has a partnership, because they do run like a business. So they don't have to be a B Corp for us to look at them as, a business. They run it as if it is, and they have that very clear measurement. And I think that then allows us to work with them in the same way. And so I think there's very few of them, though. There's very few nonprofits that are that singular focused to get that kind of recognition.
Well, let's conclude with such nice words from Shannon, and thank you, Shannon, for moderating this discussion. I'm so sorry, I forgot. Thank you. The party favor is everyone is going to be given a $25 DonorsChoose.org gift card on your way out the door. Make sure to grab one, spend it, put our search to the test, do a search for your own Jimi Hendrix, and have fun being a citizen philanthropist.